welcome to AET's video series. Today we're going to be looking at grease guns. Love them, hate them, you have to use them if you want to keep your machinery, your vehicles running in peak condition. So today we're going to look at two different styles of cartridge, show you how to change each cartridge, and talk a little bit about different kind of greases and what kind of grease you should be using. But the main focus is going to be changing tubes. So you're probably all familiar with a standard grease tube, open-ended on both sides. That's going to be the first type of cartridge we show you how to change. The second is a thread-in lube shuttle style cartridge that is really taking over the market. So let's get started. We'll start with a traditional style of grease gun. So you have a spring and plunger. We're going to pull that back and then proceed to change the cartridge. Now you can see with this grease gun we've got a little bit of grease that's worked around the back of the plunger, and how that happens is that plunger, due to the spring, is constantly pushing on that grease. Now if this grease gun's out in the cold or the warm, back of a truck or in a machine and it's vibrating, or just due to temperature change, some of that grease might work around the back of that plunger. So then you get this little headache here, and we're just going to pull it back. We've got to get all that grease out from behind that plunger. It looks like we got it. There was actually quite a bit. I'm just going to go and wipe that off. That is unfortunately a kind of the nature of the beast with this style of cartridge. It can happen. So we'll take this off. Now what I like to do is sometimes these cartridges get kind of suctioned in there, so I'm just going to go and take a pliers and work it out. Now I know this happens to be a cardboard cartridge. A lot of them has switched to a series of plastic cartridge that slide out a little bit easier. So there we have the old tube. Now we're just going to look in. I like to look in and make sure there's not a lot of grease left in the bottom. Looks like this one's alright, so we're just going to proceed to change the tube here. So there's a cap that pulls off on the end of this cartridge. That's the end we want to take off first. We just slide that down in. Now you're left with this, and it has a tin film over it with like a little pull tab, like the old soda pops used to have. So we'll go and pull that up. There we go. I like to just kind of make sure that grease is smooth on top, and then we'll go ahead and we'll thread this back in to our grease gun. I like to leave it just a touch loose, so when we release the pressure here, it has a chance to bleed out some of that air. So there we go. We released all the spring tension on it. Now what I like to do is just kind of wipe up everything again, because you can get grease on everything. It's kind of the nature of the beast here. And then you can just start pumping. So there we don't have an air gap, and then just work it tighter again, get it nice and snug, and there we go. So that is the old style grease cartridge. Now we're going to switch, and I'll show you how to do the lube shuttle cartridge, and I think you'll see why it's really taking the lubricant industry by storm. I'm just going to take these gloves off. So here we have lube shuttle grease gun. This one's quite used and abused. Empty cartridge in it. Now it's a thread-in cartridge system. All you have to do is take out the empty tube. We'll set that over here. You're going to grab the new tube here, unscrew the cap. You'll push up about 1/4 inch of grease. So I'll talk a little bit about this cartridge in a minute, but you just push on the back plunger here of the tube. You get up about 1/4 inch of grease out of the top, and then you just thread it in. Thread it in, run it up snug, and then you just start greasing. So there's no air gap, no mess. You didn't have to deal with that plunger. So that's the lube shuttle system. I'll talk a little bit about the lube shuttle cartridge and how it works. So this is an empty cartridge here, It's still open on the back end, and you can see it's threaded on the front. Now, as this tube is filled, see there's a plunger that goes in the back, and then as it's filled, that plunger gets pushed back. So there's a plastic plunger that moves with the grease and it creates a seal. So the lube shuttle cartridge operates on a vacuum. Because it threads in up tight and flush, there's no air gap up in the head of this grease gun. With every stroke, it creates a little bit of a vacuum that pulls that grease up. So you don't have an air gap, you don't have a mess, you don't have a plunger or a spring assembly you have to deal with. It's just simply working on a vacuum, and it really takes quite a bit of the headache out of the greasing process. So I think we touched on everything here between the old style cartridge, the lube shuttle cartridge. What are some of the headaches you might run into? If you have questions, please drop us a note. We're ready and available 24/7. Thank you. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk briefly now about some different types of grease. And it's just going to be a little bit of a video segue into our next video, which is all about grease, where we really tear it down, tell you how grease is made, walk you through the process, and tell you what you should be looking for when you walk into that store. Today, just a brief overview, some general guidelines. Number one thing you have to know about grease and greasing: follow the schedule. If it says in your maintenance schedule or maintenance log or owner's manual, grease every 10 working hours, you better be greasing every 10 working hours. There's no grease that's going to allow you to grease once a year. If you want zero downtime or low downtime, low repair bills, low cost, you have to follow that maintenance log. That's the most important thing I can tell you about lubricants in general. Moving from that into actual greases, when you walk into the store, you look at grease, the number one thing you're going to say is lithium based. So just to briefly get into it, when we make a grease, we take a base oil of certain viscosity and we add a soap to it to make it thick and to make it, the grease that you know. So at that point, we're using or looking at using specific types of thickeners or soaps to give us desired qualities for the application. Now, multi-purpose greases are almost all going to be lithium based. And when we get into lithium, there's 3 or 4 different kinds of soaps that are based on lithium that we use. Lithium complex is going to be your top shelf, top of the line, more expensive, best all around multi-purpose grease. Has good shear strength, good stability, good thermal stability. It's good with water, repels water, doesn't drip, drop, or wash out very easily. In terms of that, it's probably one of the best multi-purpose greases you can have. 9 times out of 10, when somebody calls, asks me what grease should we be looking for, we're telling them lithium-based grease. Beyond that, one of the next most common, thickened greases or soaps that you would see would be calcium. Calcium, there's a number of different calcium soaps that can be used in the grease making process as well. Typically, they outperform lithium in some aspects, and they're a little bit more defined as to where we use them. So it's not always going to be a great multi-grade, multi-purpose grease. It comes down to cost a little bit, because lithium can provide close to the same amount of benefits as a calcium grease, but it's going to be a little bit cheaper. But calcium does outperform lithium in a lot of different fields. Shear stability would be one of them. Water washout rates would be another. Moving past those two, you're going to get into the realm of specialized greases. Some that I would just kind of come to mind here: polyurea. We make a P100, a polyurea grease, and that is really a specialized grease for the electric motor world. Polyurea grease is used almost specifically for electric motors, electric drives, and sealed for life bearings, as well as sealed gearboxes or gear drives. One place you might see this commonly in the ag industry would be corn head drives. On your corn head, different gearboxes and that are going to call for a polyurea grade grease. Polyurea is a great grease in terms of lifespan, stability, shear strength. It's real good all around. It's not real compatible with other greases, so it's not something I recommend you switch to. If you're using a lithium now, stick with a lithium. If you're using a calcium, stick with a calcium. If it calls for polyurea grease in your operator's manual, then you should be using a polyurea grease. Also that you have Bentonite Grease, which is a clay thickened grease. It's a special application for extreme high temperatures. Bentonite Grease doesn't have a drop point, so it really finds its place in high temp applications, not a whole lot outside of the realm of extreme temp situations. So those are the greases you're most commonly going to come in touch with. We won't get into base oil viscosity today. That's kind of the next step of how to select your grease. So look up our next video. It's going to be 100% on grease and choosing the right type for your situation. Thanks for tuning in today, and we hope to hear from you soon.